General speeches in the Senate for the next 90 minutes or so. We've been in an extended quorum call. At 2, senators will continue working on a small business bill for small, high-tech, and research firms to get started. Votes on final passage could happen before the end of the week. From the Associated Press this afternoon, the House and Senate aides are saying that negotiations have resumed in an attempt to prevent a government shutdown next Friday. Those talks center on a split the differences figure to cut $33 billion from current spending levels. Democrats are pressing to ease GOP cuts to domestic agency budgets by curbing the Pentagon's growth and trimming so-called mandatory programs whose budgets run on autopilot. And from CQ today, Sam Goldfarb writes that the House on Friday will vote on a bill that essentially asks the Senate to reconsider the long-term fiscal 2011 spending bill that the House passed back in February. Republican leaders said that today. That new bill would provide that the original Republican-backed measure would become law if the Senate fails to pass legislation that would fund the government for the remainder of the fiscal year. It would also prevent lawmakers and President Obama from being paid for the duration of any government shutdown that lasts more than 24 hours. It's certain to be ignored by Senate Democrats, however, as political jockeying between House and Senate leaders continues.
I rise today, or I ask the call of the quorum be...
Oh, I'm sorry. We're in a quorum call.
Ask call of the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to speak in reaction to President Obama's speech this week outlining what he believes to be in our nation's interest in Libya. Last week, while I was working in Nevada, many of my constituents asked what my thoughts were on the military actions that we've taken in Libya. My answer to them was simply that I did not believe that the President had outlined a vital U.S. American interest in our engagement in Libya, that the United States cannot afford to be the police force of the world. This week, with the President's address to the nation, I had hoped that I would hear something to change my mind, or better yet, something that would instill confidence about the President's decision. But unfortunately, this address provided the American people with many more questions than answers. President Obama left me wondering why any vital U.S. American interest in Libya would justify military action. He said refugees would stream into Tunisia and Egypt, but we often aid refugees without F-15s. He said we needed to preserve the writ of the United Nations Security Council, but he did not explain why the safety of our men and women in uniform should ever be put at the surface of that body. He said that we needed to show dictators across the region that they could not use violence to cling to power. But if President Obama's policy fails to get rid of Gaddafi, that is exactly the lesson that they will learn. The President left me wondering about the definition of military success. He said that our military mission is limited, but how do we know when we've hit our limit? Is it when Gaddafi poses no threat to civilians? Is it when all of Gaddafi's thugs are gone? Or is it when Gaddafi steps down? This week's address from President Obama makes it clear to me that we may be headed for another decade-long military operation in the Middle East. And our servicemen and women cannot afford to be engaged in another Middle East dispute. They are stretched thin enough as it is. This weekend, the Secretary of Defense, if you put up the chart, please. This is what Secretary of Defense Gates said. He said that when asked about Libya, whether it's in our vital interest, he said, no, I don't think Libya is a vital interest for the United States. So what are we doing? Well, I understand that the President may sincerely want to save lives in Libya, but our country cannot afford to be the police force for the rest of the world. We did not step in when there was genocide in Darfur. And as a matter of fact, there's a story today, and I would ask unanimous consent to have this story put into the record.
Without objection.
The headline says, Darfuris feel betrayed by Libya no-fly zone. See, we didn't step in Darfur. We also didn't help the people in Rwanda. The last time we did try to police a situation such as this was in Somalia, and we all know how that ended. That's probably why we haven't intervened in the Ivory Coast, even though there are more than 1 million people who have fled their homes and hundreds of thousands have crossed into neighboring countries. Other nations, such as France, wanted to take the lead on addressing the Libya situation. I believe we should have allowed them to do so. The President's address made it clear to me that our military action in Libya is less about humanitarianism and more about realizing a multilateralist fantasy. You see, while Secretary Clinton has continued to refer to Senate Resolution 85 as a Senate endorsement of the President's establishment of a no-fly zone, if you could put up the chart, please, I'd like to point out to the American people that this talking point is very misleading. This is what she said. She said the United States Senate called for a no-fly zone in a resolution that it passed, I think, and she said on March 1st, and that the mission is on the brink of having been accomplished. And there was a lot of congressional support to do something. Well, this Senate resolution had the same amount of consideration that a bill to name a post office has. This bill was hotlined. There was no debate allowed on the issue, no legislative language provided to consider, and there was no vote. Senate Res. 85 described a no-fly zone as a possible course of action for the UN Security Council's consideration. It did not instruct the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations to take action, let alone authorize a military operation. Using the hotline process for this resolution as a congressional endorsement for the President's policy is simply not an adequate use of Congress's role in authorizing military action. The administration unilaterally developed, planned, executed its no-fly zone policy. The President consulted with the United Nations, he consulted with NATO, he consulted with the Arab League, but he didn't consult with the body that is mandated under our laws and our Constitution, and that's the United States Congress. There was no congressional approval or oversight of this military commitment. The Senate resolution simply does not authorize or endorse the use of force. It urges a multilateral body to consider a no-fly zone as a possible course of action. This is not the legal equivalent of an authorization to use force. This is not the political equivalent of that authorization. So what is it? I believe it's a disrespectful check into the box for congressional approval by the administration's unilateral action. As Secretary Gates has stated, there is not a vital interest for our nation in Libya, which now means that now we are engaged there. The United States is at risk of mission creep and a possibility of a take two of what happened in Somalia. Before our military intervention, U.S. interests in Libya were minimal. Our intervention has overinflated our interests in Libya's civil war. If Gaddafi stays in power, and there's many believe who he will, and he continues to fire on innocent civilians, demands for U.S. military capabilities will go up. This sounds strikingly similar to what happened in Somalia. Furthermore, this engagement has explicitly announced our support for the rebel cause, and yet we don't even know who or what these rebels are, what their ideology is. President Obama's military strategy risks damaging our already shaky credibility in this unstable region of the world. And even with complete military success, President Obama's policy may appear to fail because he has disconnected military means, a no-fly zone, from its strategic ends, Gaddafi's removal. The Obama administration has confused our priorities in the Middle East. Operations in Libya divert our focus from unstable situations in Syria, Yemen, and Iran, all of whom are much more important for the United States' interests. Operations in Libya muddle our interest and undermine our ability to lead across the region. And if turmoil in Libya calls for a no-fly zone, are we prepared to make the same commitments in Syria and Iran, where we have far greater strategic interests? If not, what kind of a message does this send to the reformers in those countries? Last year, if you recall, when there was an uprising in Iran, the president basically said, hands off. It's not in our interest. We can't do anything about it. What kind of a message does that send? Well, some have argued that oil is the underlying reason for our engagement in Libya. Whether this is the case or not, the perception is there. And instead of lessening our dependence on dangerous foreign oil, this administration has steadfastly refused to allow the United States of America to tap into its own oil reserves. In Alaska alone, there are 3 places up in Alaska that would supply the United States with 65 years worth of what we import from the Persian Gulf. 65 years worth of oil that we import from the Persian Gulf is in just 3 areas in Alaska. Unfortunately, as strongly as I believe in renewable energy, it's going to take us 30 to 40 years for renewable energy infrastructure to be up and running enough to start contributing significantly to our nation's energy supply, which is why we need to act to get more oil, natural gas, and other types of American fossil fuels into our energy supply today. I would argue that there is a vital U.S. American interest to harvest our own energy, or we risk engaging in military conflict every time those in the Middle East become unstable. Mr. President, this is absolutely a critical debate. There are legitimate differences on both sides of this debate, but this is a debate the Congress should be willing to have, whether the President should have consulted and whether this is in our vital U.S. American interest to go forward. Mr. President, I yield the floor. And note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Tennessee.
I ask consent to vitiate the quorum.
Without objection.
Call. And I ask consent to divide equally the remaining amount of morning business time.
Without objection.
Mr. President, the Senator from New York and I are on the floor today to introduce legislation, which he will do in just a moment, that will help to make the Senate a more effective place to deal with the big issues facing our country, such as the debt and our national defense and other issues. This is the result of discussions that we have had over the last several months with many members of the Senate on both sides of the aisle. It began with some reforms in the Senate rules, which included eliminating the secret hold, so-called, and doing other steps. And it's the culmination of work by a number of senators on both sides of the aisle, including Senator Lieberman, Senator Collins, the leaders, Senator Reid and Senator McConnell when they were whips, Senator Schumer and I and others, bipartisan breakfast, which we've had a couple of years ago. And it came down to the question, how many confirmations should the Senate have? How many confirmations are enough confirmations? Is it in the public interest to allow a new president, whether Democratic or Republican, to staff the government promptly? And is it in the public interest to get rid of this syndrome which is established in Washington, which I call innocent until nominated, where we invite a distinguished person to come in and run through a gauntlet that makes him or her out to be a criminal for making some mistake in the process of being confirmed. So we've worked together on that, and we've come up with legislation that Senator Schumer will introduce on behalf of both of us, on behalf of the leaders, Senator Reid and Senator McConnell, and on behalf of Senator Lieberman and Senator Collins. This legislation would answer the question, how many confirmations are enough confirmations, by reducing the number by dealing with from about 1,400 to 1,000. Just to put that into perspective, that's still more confirmations than existed when President Clinton was President of the United States. It's 4 times as many confirmations as existed when President Kennedy was President of the United States. In other words, like many things in government, the number of confirmations has grown over time, and we've ended up confirming people we have no business confirming, people who are PR officers, people who are financial information people, and we've made it difficult for the government to be staffed. Is it in our interest, those citizens, to staff the government promptly? Yes, I think it is. We've created this phenomenon where for example, when President Obama came in, Secretary Geithner, the Treasury Secretary, was sitting over there almost home alone during the middle of the worst recession since the Great Depression. According to news accounts, he didn't have much help. The key vacant positions were Assistant Secretary for Tax Policy, these are all in Treasury, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Tax Policy, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Tax Analysis, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Tax Trade and Tariff Policy, and a variety of others. That wasn't helping any of us, whether we agreed or not with President Obama or Secretary Geithner. At least after an election, a president should be able to promptly staff the government, and we in the Senate should have procedures that give us a chance to review those nominees and offer our advice and consent and confirm or reject those nominees in a reasonable period of time. If we're spending our time dealing with junior officials or PR officers, we're spending less time dealing with the Assistant Secretary of Tax Policy, on whom we should be focusing a lot of time and to whom we should be asking a lot of questions. And then this business of what I call innocent until nominated. All of us know that this exists. And it really exists sloppiness on our part, both in the legislative branch and the executive branch. If you're asked to serve in the federal government, and I know this because I was asked by the first President Bush, you fill out forms. Well, there are many forms. There are many forms in the executive branch. They have different definitions of, for example, income. So if you were to carelessly fill out the same definition of income in this form as another form, you might have been incorrect on one of the forms. And then someone might say you were telling a lie and weren't fit to serve. That's been caused by others, and including me, as being innocent until nominated. I remember when Ron Kirk was nominated by President Obama, the former mayor of Dallas, to be the trade representative. There was some issue about whether he had properly reported a charitable contribution, a speech fee that he gave to charity. Well, what difference did it make in terms of his overall fitness to serve? It held him up. It embarrassed him. It was not relevant to the inquiry. So the legislation that we have will do the following. It will take 400 positions. Half of them will be eliminated as Senate confirmations. These are the ones we don't need to spend time on. The other half will come directly to the desk, and unless an individual senator says send it on to committee, it'll be expedited. That still leaves us with 1,000 Senate confirmations that we can have, 1,000 hostages that we can take. That's more hostages than we could take under Bill Clinton. That's more hostages than the Senate could take, 4 times as many under President Kennedy. That ought to be plenty of hostages for any senator to make his or her point if that's what we seek to do. And then the second thing it would do is set up a process whereby an executive branch commission would review the various forms that nominees are expected to fill out, try to have a single smart form in the executive branch, consult with the committees of Congress to see if we can do the same thing with our forms, and make it possible that we can get all the information we want without unnecessarily subjecting nominees to harassment or trickery just because they're not wise enough to fill out different forms with different definitions. I think it's a substantial step forward. May not sound like much to those watching the United States Senate, but let me just say that both of our leaders, Reid and McConnell, have said they tried and couldn't get it done. Senator McConnell, Senator Lieberman, and Senator Collins have tried and they couldn't get it done. I worked with Senator Lieberman 2 years ago. We couldn't get it done. What has happened this time is that as a result of the discussion we had earlier in the year about making the Senate a more effective place to work, with the full support of the leaders, Reid and McConnell, with the full support of Senator Lieberman and Senator Collins, and with the good work of Senator Schumer, we've come up with a consensus piece of legislation which has broad bipartisan support. Both sides of the aisle, including many chairmen and ranking members of the committee who you would think might be the first ones to object, still leaves the Senate with the prerogatives it ought to have in terms of reviewing presidential nominees, and separates out those who take our time away from the more important things that we ought to be doing. I want to thank the Senator from New York for the way he's worked on this. He's been constructive and direct and helpful. I thank the leaders for their support. I hope that the committees will rapidly consider the legislation that Senator Schumer will offer on our behalf, and I hope that it will show that we can take another small step in making the Senate a more effective place to work. I ask consent to include following my remarks, remarks that I made earlier on this subject, and prior to that, I'd like to list the presidential appointments no longer requiring Senate confirmation. There are about 200 of those, and privileged nominations, those are the ones that will be expedited unless a single senator decides that he or she wants to have this nominee sent to the committee, and that's about another 200. I thank the President, and I notice that the Senator from New York is also on the floor, and I thank him for his work on this.
Mr. President.
Senator from New York.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I want to thank my colleague from Tennessee. He's been a great partner in this. In fact, I would say it was his impetus that brought us here. He had thought about this long and hard, had worked on it previously, and as usual, it's been a pleasure to work with Senator Alexander on the Rules Committee or anywhere else, and I thank him for really spearheading this. I also want to thank the two leaders, Senator Reid, of course, my friend, and so proud to work under his leadership, and Senator McConnell. And I have to say this, Senator McConnell and I often, we have our differences, but he has on all of these issues of moving the Senate forward been operating in good faith, and his support of this legislation has allowed us to get here. And finally, the committee chair, Senator Lieberman, as well as Ranking Member Collins, have been equal partners in this legislation, and it will go through their committee. Finally, I want to thank all the committee chairs. And they have been very understanding of the need to do this. Obviously, committee chairs might say, I want to have before my committee every single person, but ultimately they've realized it slows down the Senate. And while we're introducing the legislation today, a number of committee chairs on our side, probably with the consent of their ranking members, have come to me and said there might be other positions they'd want to add to the list, and that would be a good idea. We've tried to be careful here. We don't want to step on any toes or prerogatives. In the past, when this legislation was attempted, people said, well, just I don't want this one, I don't want that one. So we were fairly minimal. It'll have a real effect on the Senate. It's close to a third of the appointments. But there may be different committees that say, I don't need to approve. My committee, the committee on which I chair, the committee on which I'm ranking member, doesn't need to approve these 5 or 6 more. Add them to your list. And we would hope our committee chairs would do that before the bill is considered, because it will be considered by Senator Lieberman's committee, and there they could make such additions. So let me say this about the process. One of the most important duties of the United States Senate is the constitutional advise and consent power. We were careful to balance this interest with the importance of making the confirmation process more efficient, not only for the benefit of the Senate, but as well for the benefit of the administration, its agencies, and, as Senator Alexander so aptly pointed out, for those individuals who are nominated as well. The Senate was designed to be a thoughtful and deliberative body, but the confirmation process has often become dangerously close to being gridlocked. The American public is harmed when we are not able to get qualified people confirmed to positions in a timely manner. All of the positions covered in this proposal tend to be non-controversial, and more closely resemble appointments that are currently made without Senate approval. The legislation consists of a standalone bill, the Presidential Appointment Efficiency and Streamlining Act, and a resolution. And as Senator Alexander touched on, the standalone bill will eliminate from Senate confirmation 200 executive nomination positions and nearly 300,000 additional officer corps positions. The resolution will create a standing order that will streamline approval of almost 250 part-time board members. We intend to move both of these pieces together in an effort to reform the process. Together, these two pieces will remove or streamline, as I mentioned, nearly one-third of currently confirmable Senate appointments. The Act will remove the need for confirmation for several categories of positions, including legislative and public affairs positions, chief financial officers, information technology administrators, internal management and administrative positions, and deputies or non-policy related assistant secretaries who report to individuals who are Senate confirmable. Removing these positions from Senate confirmation will allow a new administration to be set up with more efficiency and speed, thus making government work better for the people. In addition, we've removed thousands of positions from Public Health Service Officer Corps and the National Oceanic and Atmosphere Administration Officer Corps from the process. They're non-controversial. Their removal will just prevent the possibility of further gridlock. The Act will also create a working group, because this is a work in progress, and Senator Alexander's been working on it longer than I have or most of us in this body, that will provide recommendations on the process to further streamline the appointment and confirmation process. The group will make recommendations to the President and the Senate about streamlining the paperwork process for nominees by creating a single searchable electronic smart forum, and will also conduct a review of the current background investigation requirements. Senators Lieberman and Collins held a hearing on the confirmation process last month in the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, which will have jurisdiction over the piece, and the hearing was extremely helpful to our working group efforts and further highlighted the fact that our system of dealing with executive nominations needs reform. The resolution piece of the package will create a streamlined process for part-time positions on boards or commissions. A majority of these boards require political balance, a certain number of Democrats, a certain number of Republicans. We're doing this rather than eliminating Senate consideration in its entirety in order to ensure that these politically balanced boards remain bipartisan. This was actually a recommendation, I believe, of Senator McConnell, and I think it was an apt one. The resolution creates a standing order that will provide for an expedited process for this class of privileged nominations by creating new pages on the executive calendar. When the Senate receives a nomination from the President, it will be placed on a new section on the executive calendar called Privileged Nomination Information Requested, while the nominee submits paperwork to the Committee of Jurisdiction. When the chair of that committee certifies all committee questionnaires have been received from the nominee, the nomination will be placed on the Privileged Nomination Information Received section of the executive calendar, and as Senator Alexander mentioned, after 10 session days, the nomination is on the full executive calendar and will wait the full Senate with the presumption that these positions would be passed by unanimous consent, so any single senator can object, although we doubt in almost every case that any will. From the beginning of the process until the expiration of 10 session days, any member can request on his or her own behalf or on behalf of any identified member that the nomination be referred to committee. We think that incorporating this safeguard is in line with our elimination of secret holds earlier this year. The presumption for these part-time positions are, as I said, that they'll be approved with the nomination unanimous consent and not be held up as part of other battles or leverage or whatever else. The resolution would come before this resolution would become before the Rules Committee, which Senator Alexander and I lead, and we hope to take action on it very soon. We're confident that this package will eliminate many of the delays in the current confirmation process. They're detrimental to the efficient operation of government and to the efforts to recruit the most qualified people to these federal jobs. The package we have proposed today is the first step in protecting Americans' people's interest in having a newly elected president move quickly and efficiently to set up a government. And before I yield the floor, I note that you, Mr. President, in your impetus to reform the Senate, can claim some credit for this move as well. With that, I yield the floor, and we'll be introducing the legislation. Senator Alexander, myself, Senator Reid, McConnell, Collins, Lieberman, and I think about 8 or 9 other co-sponsors as well, bipartisan, this afternoon. Thank you. I yield the floor.
The senator from New York is recognized.
I have 11 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They've been approved by the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
I note the absence of a quorum, Mr.
The
President.
clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President,
Senator from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. President, I ask that the proceedings of the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I come back to the floor again one more time today to honor another great federal employee. I know the presiding officer and I and so many of our colleagues recognize that literally in the state of New Mexico and the Commonwealth of Virginia here in Washington, there are countless federal employees who do great things in terms of public service and don't often get the recognition that they deserve. And as we debate the balance of this year's budget and think about the incredible issues in front of us in terms of our debt and deficit, issues that have to be confronted, we also sometimes have to remember that our actions or failure to act have enormous consequences. Consequences on the people who defend our country, protect our homeland, make sure that the basic operations of government work, whether it's making sure our federal parks are open, making sure that those folks here in Washington who are federal police are on the job, and our sometimes failure to agree or failure to come together on a particularly predictability for the balance of this fiscal year has effect on their lives. Now, that's not the subject of my purpose of rising today, but I do think it is important to bear that in mind as I continue the tradition that was started by Senator Ted Kaufman last year of coming to the floor on a regular basis and honoring federal employees. Time and again, I've seen how the skills and dedication of federal workers has yielded groundbreaking benefits for our country. Today, I want to highlight a federal worker who is at the forefront of modern technology. Joshua Beanfang is a physicist at the National Institute for Standards and Technology. He created a new method of transmitting encrypted messages in a 100% secure way by using quantum physics. I know the presiding officer is an expert in quantum physics, and I unfortunately am not, but since there are so many physicist operations in the great state of New Mexico, and he, I know, is very familiar with these subjects, but I still have a great deal to learn. But my understanding is, in practical terms, this means that Mr. Beanfang means that message interceptors will be unable to capture sensitive information, critically important to protecting the homeland. Prior to Mr. Beanfang's breakthrough, quantum cryptology was thought to be a largely experimental means of transmission. But he was able to both secure messages and speed up their delivery. In fact, this technology has set world speed records in the quantum cryptographic field. I know the presiding officer probably knows what those speed records are. I don't. I know his background in quantum physics makes him understand that, but I think it's a fairly remarkable achievement. Without a doubt, Mr. Beanfang's discovery will be greatly important to our national security, commerce, and equally important, privacy of medical records. His work also demonstrates the diversity of our federal workforce. While we may have our fair share of bureaucrats, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of scientists and researchers doing cutting-edge work within the federal government and applying their intellect to benefit the American people. I hope my colleagues will join me in congratulating Joshua Beanfang, as well as those at the National Institute for Standards and Technology, on their success, which will no doubt aid Americans in the years to come. Thank you, Mr. President. And with that, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President, I ask that the proceedings of quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the period of the quorum call between now and 2 p.m. be equally divided to both sides.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka?
Mr. President. Senator from Wyoming is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection, so ordered.
Ask unanimous consent I be allowed to engage in a colloquy with one of my colleagues.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come today to the floor as a physician who's practiced medicine in Wyoming for a quarter of a century, as an orthopedic surgeon, taking care of families from all across the state, and to present a physician's second opinion of what's happened with this health care law that the people of this country are having to deal with and live under. And as Nancy Pelosi said about a year ago, she said, first we have to pass it before you get to find out what's in it. Well, the American people are finding out what's in it, and they, frankly, aren't happy with it. They don't like it. They don't want to live with it. They don't want to live under it. You know, a year ago when we started this discussion, you know, what we heard and what we believe and what I believe as a physician is what people are looking for in this country is the care they need from the doctor they want at a cost they can afford. And this 2,700 bill, 2,700-page bill that's costing trillions of dollars doesn't really deliver that at all. To me, it is a bill that makes it harder to create jobs. It increases the cost of care. It eliminates choice. It's raising taxes. It's locking 16 million Americans into a broken Medicaid system, and is taking $500 billion from our seniors, not to help take care of Medicare to solve that problem, but to start a whole new government entitlement program. And you know, I was visiting with one of my colleagues, Dr. Chris Kege, an orthopedic surgeon who I trained under in my residency program. Just the impact on seniors alone, those who need hip replacements, knee replacements. And, you know, as surgeons, we know that when you take that kind of money away from Medicare, it doesn't make it easier for seniors to get the care that they need. And now courts have ruled, two courts, one in Virginia and one in Florida, that this health care law and the mandate, Mr. President, that everyone in the country must buy or obtain government-approved health insurance, two courts have ruled that unconstitutional. Well, the states are at an impasse knowing what to do. How do they react? When will the Supreme Court decide? What kind of resources must those states commit? And that's why I'm so delighted to be joined by my colleague, Senator Hutchinson from Texas, on the floor, because I think she has the right answer, Mr. President. She has introduced, as an amendment to the bill that we're discussing today on the floor, the Save Our States Act. It's an amendment to suspend implementing these health reform measures until the lawsuits have been settled and we actually get a clear understanding, because I believe that this law is unconstitutional. And so I would ask my colleague, and I note that there are quite a few senators that have co-sponsored this legislation, if she would perhaps share as part of a second opinion your thoughts and what the states have to live under now and what rights and opportunities the states should have.
Well, Mr. President,
Senator from Texas.
I certainly appreciate what Dr. Barrasso, Senator Barrasso from Wyoming does for us on a regular basis, and that is as one of the few physicians in our body, to be exact, and he is one of the two. He tells us the things that are happening in this health care reform bill that are hurting our health care system, hurting the quality of health care in our country, and at a time when we need to assure senior citizens that the Medicare cuts will not take effect, and as we certainly want our small businesses to hire people rather than stop at 50, because then they're going to start getting fines for not giving the government-prescribed health care that is in the Health Care Reform Act that was passed last year. And so what I'm doing in my amendment is one of those pending in the bill that is before us is saying, stop. We have now had two courts, two federal courts, one from Virginia, one from Florida, that have said this law is unconstitutional. And yet the administration is continuing to implement the law, even though it has certainly now been called into question. I am most affected by the number of states that are having to do the same thing. Most of our state legislatures are in session right now. Every one of them, actually I think approximately 44 states out of 50, have budget shortfalls. And yet our states are having to spend millions and hundreds of millions of dollars to implement a law that may be declared unconstitutional. Some states have said we're not going to implement. But if they say that, then they are going to be in jeopardy when they're not prepared if the law is constitutional, and they will be paying late fees and fines for not implementing during this kind of time when we're in limbo. Some states are saying, well, we're going to go ahead and implement, but we have a budget shortfall, and we would really like not to be required to implement a law that may be void, and we're spending millions of dollars when we really need that money for education, frankly, or Medicaid. So my amendment just says we will stop any further implementation of this law until we know the final court opinion has been rendered by the Supreme Court of the United States whether or not the law is valid. That's it. That's it. Simple, clear. We will just let every state know and have a level playing field that you do not have to spend the hundreds of millions of dollars that are now being spent on implementation unless we know the Supreme Court has said the law is valid. I have 36 co-sponsors of my amendment, including the senator from Wyoming, who is one of our two physicians in the Senate. And I think that we will have a large support because I'm getting letters from organizations. I got a letter from a group that has been formed to say we really need to start over on this health care reform bill. And these are people who represent the employers of America, the employers who want to be able to give their employees the health care coverage that they can afford right now. It may not be the government-prescribed health care, but many are trying to do it. And the groups that have signed this letter supporting my amendment to say stop implementation now are the Associated Builders and Contractors, the Associated General Contractors, the electrical contractors, the food service distributors, the international franchisees, the National Association of Manufacturers, the National Association of Wholesaler Distributors, the National Retail Federation, the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, the United States Chamber of Commerce, and the Independent Women's Voice, the 60-Plus Association. These are the groups that are saying, let's stop the upheaval that this has caused in our country, and let's wait and see what the Supreme Court says before we have the outlays of millions of dollars. And most certainly the small businesses that are not increasing their employment because they are so concerned about the implications of this health care reform bill. Let me just give the senator from Wyoming an example from my home state of Corpus Christi. A small business in Corpus Christi, Texas, has 34 employees. The cheapest option that they have for their health insurance renewal is 44% more than their insurance just last year. They have just days to decide whether they can continue to offer their employees health insurance. Now, this is in anticipation of the health reform bill going into effect and causing these employers to have to meet these new mandates. The insurance companies are already ratcheting up their insurance premiums in anticipation of this law. This is one of the key reasons that we need to stop the implementation until we know if this law is valid, so that our businesses will have the freedom to provide affordable health care coverage to their employees. So, Mr. President, I thank the senator from Wyoming for coming in with his second opinion, because we know that he has unique experience working with our health care system, and I want to make sure that we don't do what the physician motto is, and that is harm when we haven't thought it through and we don't have all the ramifications. First, do no harm. That's what the motto is. It's simple and clear, and I think we need to stop implementing this bill until the Supreme Court has ruled on its constitutionality. Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank the senator from Wyoming.
Mr. President, just to follow on that, I'm so pleased to be a co-sponsor, an original co-sponsor of the Save Our States Act. States are very concerned. As I heard my colleague from Texas say, there are 44 states are in the red right now. And when you hear the complaints from governors of both parties, they are both having to live under this law, have great concerns at it. Some states, as my colleague from Texas knows, have actually applied for waivers so they don't have to live under the constraints of the law. The state of Maine has been given a waiver. 2.5 million Americans have been given waivers by the Secretary of Health and Human Service. Many of those are union workers and who actually supported the law. But when they found out what this law was going to cost, as the example that you have just given from Corpus Christi, they say, we can't live under this. And yet to have to be forced to go ahead and put this expense forward and pay for this at a time of huge financial challenges for our states, it just seems that the Save Our States Act is a rational, logical, common-sense way to deal with this. Now, I'm going to be home in Wyoming again this weekend, very likely at a health fair in Worland, Wyoming, visiting with people from the communities. Health fairs are ways for people to get low-cost health screenings, because we know that early prevention and then early detection of problems is a way to help keep down the cost of health care. Those are things that work. We need to repeal and replace this health care law with things that are common-sense solutions that work. Of course, allow people to make it legal for them to buy insurance across state lines. Give people individual incentives to stay healthy. Allow people who buy their health insurance individually to get the same tax breaks as the big companies get. Deal with the lawsuit abuse that doctors will tell you impacts on the way they practice, raises the cost of care. There are so many things we need to do, and that is why, Mr. President, I come to the floor again today with a doctor's second opinion on the health care law, saying it is time to repeal and replace this health care law and replace it with something that works for the American people. This law that we have passed now on the books, one that I believe is unconstitutional, and one that the Save Our States Act will help our states deal with, is a way that I think will help the health care of Americans who are struggling at this time to dealing with the onerous requirements that they see coming at them under the President's new health care law. And with that, Mr. President, thank you, and I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
States.